In this video, we will show you how to replace your inner tie rod end on this Toyota Sienna. This is part of your front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done so, we'll continue on to removing all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now with the wheel off, we have a close view of the outer tie rod and the inner tie rod end. In the center of the two, you're going to find a 24mm jam nut. We'll use a 24mm wrench and break this free. Once you have movement from that area, we'll follow the outer tie rod end to where it connects onto your steering knuckle. In this area, you'll be using a 17mm to remove the mounting nut. If you find you have a locking cotter pin, remove that first. Once you have the nut off of there, the next thing you'll want to do is start it back on just a couple threads. And now we're going to separate the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. Commonly, people will use a pickle fork and make their way in between this area, but that can cause damage, so we'll just continue on with a hammer, cause some vibration to break this free. To remove the outer tie rod end, we're going to turn this counterclockwise. While doing so, count the amount of turns it takes to remove it. Write that down somewhere. 1, 2, 3, and so on. I got 21, yours may vary. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. Get this jam nut off of here. Now we can continue on to removing our power steering rack bellows boot from the inner tie rod end and from the power steering rack. To remove the bellows boot, go ahead and squeeze this clamp and slide it out of position. Squeeze this with some pliers. Now we'll continue to the inner mounting clamp. Typically on this, you're going to find a single time use. So I'll just be using a long bar, make my way all the way down that bellows boot to where it connects onto the power steering rack. Looking in this area, I can see a metallic tab. That's part of the locking clip. We'll just break that right out of position and recycle it properly. The next thing we'll do is use an angled pick to break the bellows boot free from the inner tie rod end. It's common for them to be stuck together. Once you do have that freed up, it's time to remove the bellows boot. We'll take hold of it, give it a little twist to break it free from the power steering rack on the inside there, and then complete the removal by sliding it out of position. A quick inspection, make sure it's soft and pliable, and we'll set it aside. To finish removing the inner tie rod end from the power steering rack, you're going to have to make your way up to where the ball and socket is located. Most inner tie rod end tools are going to hold on to this socket area here. Sometimes you'll have an inner tie rod end tool that's shaped like a tube, makes its way all the way down here with an adapter. Other inner tie rod end tools might look something like this, where I'm just going to put it right over the socket area, tighten it down, and then we'll turn this counterclockwise to remove it. Now that that's broken free, we'll remove our tool. Remove the inner tie rod end from the power steering rack. There it is, friend. With the inner tie rod end off of there, the next thing that you need to do is clean and inspect the power steering rack where your brand new inner tie rod end will go. We'll give this a quick wipe, a close inspection. After you've confirmed this area here, just have a look at the power steering rack itself. What we're looking for is to see if there's any fluid dripping out of this area. If there is, it means the rack seal's bad, and typically you'd have to go ahead and replace that power steering rack. Ours looks fine. Let's continue with our installation. To install your brand new inner tie rod end, we'll be taking this, align it with the threaded hole, and start it in by hand. After that, you just want to go ahead and snug it up with your inner tie rod end tool. Now when you're tightening this, you only want to go till it bottoms out and then just take it a tiny bit further. You don't want to over torque this and cause any damage to the power steering rack. Once you're sure that's tight, go ahead and remove your tool. Now let's pay attention to the ball and socket joint here. Make sure it's well lubricated. Work that around a little bit. Now that we have lubricant there, we'll also make sure that we coat this area along the inner tie rod end where you can see this small groove making its way around. This is where the inner tie rod end boot will sit, and this will help the alignment professional in the end. Now we can prepare to install our Bellows boot. When we go to install this, we'll be using a wire tie along the wider area that slides over that power steering rack. Once it's in place, we'll make sure we tighten it. Slide that right on over the shaft, all the way down to the power steering rack. Once you feel as though you have that in place, we'll just tighten this up as I mentioned. Trim off the excess. Now we'll make sure we slide the boot into the proper position here. Should sit right onto that groove. Continue with your clamp. If you don't have a clamp, you just want to use a wire tie for that as well. Next, we'll apply some anti-seize along the threaded portion of the inner tie rod end. After that, install your jam nut. Now it's time for your outer tie rod end. You remember when you had removed it, I told you to count the amount of turns it takes to remove it. So when you go to install this, you're going to do the same amount of turns. One, two, three, and so on. After you've counted the amount of turns and you're sure you're correct, continue on at that knuckle. Let's get this in there. Now it's time for our outer tie rod end nut. Start it on, snug it up. Now that we snugged it, torque it to 36 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing that you need to do is pay attention to the slots on the mounting nut in comparison to the hole that goes through the stud of the outer tie rod end. We need to have that aligned so we can put in a locking cotter pin. If it's not properly aligned, continue tightening the nut until the very next slot is. After that, put in your cotter pin. Get this in there. Just peen that over. We'll make our way to the jam nut. Turn that counterclockwise until it's completely bottomed out against your outer tie rod end. After that, you want to snug this up. The torque for this is 65 foot-pounds. If you can't torque it, just make sure it's nice and tight. The next thing you'll want to make sure you do is level out the outer tie rod end in comparison to your steering knuckle. One last quick inspection while we're in this area, and we can reinstall our wheel. Now we'll bottom out the lug nuts, get the wheel back on the ground, and torque each of these to 76 foot-pounds. Now with the wheel safely back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.